Welcome to Daily Dose of Knowledge. There is a conversation nobody is having honestly. Not about romance. Not about tradition. About what marriage actually does to the human brain, the body, and the arc of a life. Stay with us. And subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Marriage has been dismissed, delayed, and redefined by modern culture, more than almost any other human institution. And in the middle of all that noise, the science has been quietly building a case, not a romantic case. A biological one, a neurological one, a psychological one. And the data is more compelling than most people are ready to hear. Let's start with the brain, because this is where the effects are most measurable and most surprising. Married people have consistently lower cortisol levels than their unmarried counterparts. This is not a small difference. It is a chronic sustained reduction in the brain's primary stress hormone. Cortisol at chronically elevated levels damages the hippocampus. That is the brain region responsible for memory and learning. It accelerates cognitive decline. It weakens immune function. It disrupts sleep at the neurological level. Marriage, by reducing baseline cortisol, is doing something to the brain that most people spend money trying to replicate through supplements, therapy, and sleep optimization. Now let's talk about why the cortisol drops. The human nervous system is a social organ. It was not designed for isolation. It was designed to co-regulate. Co-regulation means using the presence, rhythm, and predictability of another person to calibrate your own threat response. Psychologists have documented this extensively. The nervous system of one person literally synchronizes with the nervous system of another in close sustained relationships. A stable marriage provides the most consistent co-regulation environment available to an adult human being. The nervous system stops running on high alert. The baseline threat level drops. And the downstream effects touch every system in the body. Now let's go deeper into what happens to the brain's reward architecture inside a long-term committed relationship. Oxytocin is released during physical contact, eye contact, and emotional attunement with a committed partner. It reduces amygdala reactivity, the brain's alarm system. It increases trust, social bonding, and emotional resilience. Vasopressin, released in long-term pair bonding, reinforces the neural architecture of loyalty, commitment, and social stability. These are not feelings. They are neurochemicals reshaping the brain's operating parameters over time. The brain of a long-term married person is chemically different from the brain of someone living in chronic isolation. The difference is measurable, and it compounds with time. Now let's talk about physical health, because the data here is some of the most replicated in medical research. Married people live longer. This is not a correlation from one study. It is a finding replicated across dozens of countries, multiple decades, and thousands of participants. A landmark meta-analysis published in PLOS Medicine found that social isolation carries a mortality risk equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Marriage is one of the most consistent forms of sustained social connection, directly counters that risk. Married men show significantly lower rates of cardiovascular disease, stroke, and cancer mortality compared to unmarried men of the same age and health profile. Regular emotional support reduces inflammatory markers. Stable sleep patterns reduce cardiovascular strain. Having someone who notices when something is wrong increases the likelihood of early medical intervention. Your spouse is not just your partner. They are a chronic health intervention running every day without a prescription. Now let's talk about mental health, and this is where the data becomes personally significant. Marriage is one of the strongest protective factors against depression and anxiety identified in psychiatric research. A large-scale study published in Psychological Medicine found that married individuals had significantly lower rates of depression, anxiety disorders, and substance abuse than their single or divorced counterparts. This held even after controlling for socioeconomic status, age, and prior mental health history. The protection is not simply about having someone present. It is about having a committed witness to your life. Someone whose presence signals, you matter, your existence is known, you are not navigating this alone. That signal does something specific in the brain. It reduces the activation of the default mode network's self-referential negative processing. That is the mental loop that produces rumination, existential anxiety, and chronic low-grade despair. You are not just less lonely in a good marriage. Your brain is operating in a fundamentally different mode. Now let's talk about personality, because marriage changes who you are beyond the relationship itself. Research consistently shows that marriage produces what psychologists call social maturation. The daily negotiation of shared life, finances, decisions, conflict, compromise, builds cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation, and perspective taking. You become better at managing discomfort, better at delaying gratification, better at reading other people's emotional states. These are not soft skills. They are neurological capacities that transfer into every domain of life: career, friendship, creativity, leadership. The person who has learned to navigate genuine sustained intimacy is operating with a more developed social brain. Now let's talk about purpose, because this is one of the most powerful effects of marriage. Viktor Frankl identified the need for meaning as the primary driver of psychological health. Not pleasure, not comfort. Meaning. Marriage, and especially parenthood, within marriage, is one of the most reliable generators of sustained meaning available to a human being. Research by psychologist Roy Baumeister confirmed that married individuals consistently score higher on life meaning measures than unmarried individuals. Meaning and happiness are not the same thing. Meaning persists through difficulty. Happiness does not. The married person navigating hardship with a partner has a meaning structure that holds under pressure. The isolated individual facing the same hardship has no equivalent anchor. Now let's talk about something the modern conversation almost never addresses honestly. Delaying marriage has costs. Real, measurable, neurological costs. The brain's capacity for deep attachment and pair bonding is not static across a lifetime. Research in developmental psychology suggests the neurological flexibility required for deep relational commitment is highest in young adulthood. The brain that forms its deepest attachment architecture early carries that architecture forward. The brain that delays, accumulating years of autonomy and solo identity, finds the integration of another person progressively more neurologically demanding. This is not a moral argument. It is a neurological one. Now let's talk about what the research says about the conditions that make marriage beneficial. Not all marriages produce these benefits. A high conflict or chronically unstable marriage produces stress responses that rival or exceed those of isolation. The protective factor is not the institution. It is the quality of the bond. Research by John Gottman over 40 years identified 4 destructive patterns that predict divorce with over 90% accuracy: contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Their presence destroys everything the science promises. Their absence, replaced by genuine curiosity, repair attempts, and emotional attunement, predicts a marriage that delivers all of it. The institution is the container. The quality of the relationship is the content. Both matter. Now let's talk about what marriage does to identity. Human beings are not optimized for individuality. They are optimized for belonging. The self-concept that forms inside a committed relationship. I am a partner. I am building something. I am responsible to another person, is neurologically stabilizing. Research on identity and well-being consistently shows that relational identities produce higher psychological stability than achievement-based or consumption-based ones. You are not diminished by commitment. You are neurologically anchored by it. Here is the final layer, and it is the one the modern world most actively resists. The culture tells you that marriage is a constraint, that it limits freedom, self-expression, and personal growth. The neuroscience tells you something different. The brain does not flourish in unlimited freedom. It flourishes in meaningful constraint, in a commitment that demands growth, produces co-regulation, and generates meaning. Freedom without commitment produces a nervous system permanently on alert. Commitment without resentment produces a nervous system that can finally rest. The brain you are trying to optimize functions better inside a good marriage than outside one. That is not a cultural opinion, it is a biological finding, replicated across decades, cultures, and continents. If that made you think differently about where you are and where you are going, subscribe to Daily Dose of Knowledge. Drop a comment with what you think is the biggest reason people delay marriage today. And explore our videos on psychology, human behavior, self-help, society, and science. There is always something here that will shift the way you think.